Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Kev Baker. That's right, it's time for the Kev Baker Show right here on TFR Live. Now, I'm coming to you from Glasgow, Scotland, and tonight I'm joined by my good friend, fellow host on the network, author, researcher, speaker, Mr. Anthony Patch. He's here, he's back, and we're going to be getting into more of the science. And tonight we're going to be saying goodbye qubits, hello Trits. Now, more of that as the show progresses, but I hope you've all had a nice weekend out there. I've had a nice, quiet, lazy one. Got new fridge freezer delivered on Saturday, so installed that. And then since then, just been chilling out, recovering after 5 hours of amazing radio on Friday with my good friend here, Tony Patch, and of course, the Woo Crew. Now, before we get into all of the good stuff tonight, don't forget your main man, Mr. Johnny Whistles. He will be joining us within probably the next 45 minutes to an hour. So never fear, Whistles is almost here. And of course, one guy who is here tonight is Anthony Patch. And Tony, how are you doing, my friend? Because we had another amazing show on Friday. We finally got connected to David Heavener. Might only have been one segment we've done with David, but what a powerful segment of radio that is. And how you doing, man?
Yeah, very good. Friday, we really packed a lot in there. We got real technical and real deep, and then we moved away from the computer language and discussion into a very somber discussion about pedophilia and child abuse and sex trade. And I'm going to be continuing that discussion on Friday as well. Probably not the whole show, but we will touch on it every Friday from now until our conference coming up on September 16th and 17th. It'll be a live stream conference. We'll be talking about the subject of pedophilia and, of course, technology and, of course, biblical scripture. But otherwise, we got some deep stuff for people today. I hope they've got their technical hats on and are ready to be thinking, because already our heads are hurting, aren't they, Kev?
Absolutely. And you know, I'm a science geek. I love all this stuff. But you sent me something today, and I was totally puzzled because you were talking about something called ternary. Now, this is Ternary. And like I say, I was sitting there scratching my head thinking, it's not very often I'm stumped here, but I was stumped, Anthony. Talk to us about what you've been looking into, and more specifically, like I was saying, goodbye qubits, hello Trits. You like that?
I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I'm composing an article for our magazine, You and Me, because you're a major contributor to our magazine entitled Entangled. And the article I'm composing for the September issue is Binary Qubit to Ternary Trit, D-Wave's hidden code. Yes, we're going to talk about my buddies at D-Wave again today. And believe it or not, in the second hour, we're going to tie ternary trits to the Mandela effect. Can't let that one go, can we?
Absolutely. And some people in the chat room are shouting out trinary. Phyllis is shouting 3 ? And this is where we're going tonight, because often we talk about bits, ones and zeros. And then we were talking about the qubits. Remember those quantum bits that can be ones and zeros at the same time? They can go into superposition. Well, now let's talk about something completely new. And to start with, it's so alien. If anyone's like me out there, it's going to be quite confusing. But there is a lot of stuff on the internet where you can look at this, and it's ternary. This is where we're working from a base of 3, Anthony. It's not just ones and zeros anymore, is it?
No, now we are talking about 0, 1, and 2 as a base 3 system. But in terms of a balanced ternary, because there are a couple of different variations to ternary, but ternary, again, is spelled Ternary. Okay, so ternary system is comprised of 3 digits. It's a -1, a 0, and a +1. That's a balanced ternary system. And the reason that we're talking about this is it has everything to do, here we go again, can't get away from theyve, can't get away from tetrahedrons. So here comes, Mr. Patch talking about tetrahedrons again, but it all factors into a balanced ternary form of computer coding, computer programming. So it is going to get a little deep here today, folks, but we'll try to keep it, up on the surface, and I'll try to translate it for you. But what I'm saying here is that, in short, because I like to give you the punchline at the beginning of the show, I will label it as conjecture at this point, because this is early in my research. Conjecture. I believe that theyve has moved away from binary programming to this three-numbered ternary programming system, moving away from qubits, which are quantum bits, 0 and 1 binary, to the trinary digit called the trit, T-R-I-T. I believe, because of looking at things that we'll add to and define and give you the evidence later, I believe that the actual process of combinatorial programming, and therefore recursive neural network, Boltzmann machine, deep machine learning for AI, is not based on binary. It is based on a trinary form of computer programming, including decoherence, error correction coding. So that's where we're headed, folks.
You see, this is why it makes a lot more sense, Anthony, right? And for the listeners out there, we often talk about how the elites use the cube, and it should really be the tetrahedron that they're working from. And when you said to me about this trinary, this 3-digit, this working from a base of 3, automatically my head's thinking 369 tetrahedrons. And just from a total layman's point of view, it seemed to make a lot more sense. Now, we were also watching a video the other day, and it was to do with error correction, just like what you were talking about there. And this is where this ternary code has a vast advancement on anything else they're using right now, because this is going to be a lot quicker than their current methods in error testing and error checking, Anthony, isn't it?
It is. When we talk about the mathematics that's obtained through necromancy, as applied with theyve's quantum computers that are accessing what they call parallel dimensions, I call them concentric dimensions. In other words, concentric circles, concentric rings dimensions, rather than parallel. But the model that theyve talks about when they say parallel dimensions comprises a cube. So picture a cube with straight lines. Those lines are in parallel. Those prescribe parallel dimensions. That is the model that they used for writing code to correct errors. And there's a 3-to-1 ratio. If you have a bit and you want to determine whether it's the answer, it's accurate, or whether it's an error, it actually takes 3 additional bits to arrive at a decision. The decision meaning, is this the correct answer, or is it an error that needs to be corrected? So there's a 1-to-3 relationship, 1 bit to 3 bits. In the process of writing that error correction software, they describe that geometrically. Okay, the math, again, prescribes geometry. This all goes back to talking about obtaining information through necromancy, getting a mathematical grouping of information that results in geometric shapes. We're giving you just the cube. That's their model for error correction, is the cube. However, I believe the actual model that they're using is not the cube, because as this software engineer that Kev and I watched on this presentation, he said that using the cube model for programming, for correcting of errors, only arrives at half of the perfect correction, that they're only halfway there. At the conclusion of watching his presentation, I said to myself and to him, you should be using a tetrahedron, not a cube. Again, the tetrahedron is the simplest polytope that can enclose a volume, the simplest shape that can enclose a volume. It is not a cube. A cube is composed of tetrahedrons. Therefore, you need to, in the most efficient manner of arriving at a solution, don't use a more complex geometric shape, therefore more steps to arriving at a solution. Go to a simpler geometric shape that requires fewer steps. What I'm outlining to you very quickly here is that they do 3 steps with a cube to correct an error or arrive at a solution, whereas with a tetrahedron, there's only 2 steps. So that's the short version of it. I'm still working on writing out the program, if you will, utilizing a tetrahedron for error correction rather than a cube. And that's where we're at right now with the research. And we'll bring on more probably Wednesday. When I get done writing this up, I think I will have definitively proved that the proper way to write your error correction code is to use a tetrahedron. And therefore, my conjecture is that's what theyve is already doing. And there's a couple of more things to add to that. But go ahead, Kev.
You know, Anthony Patch has been proven time and time and time again to be correct. You know, he makes these claims months, sometimes years in advance, and then some obscure paper. I already see it, Anthony, how the future is going to affect the past here and actually confirm everything that you're saying, because your track record is absolutely flawless so far. We're still waiting for the demonic hordes to come through the massive portal at CERN, admittedly. But then when we put that information out, we always said that was conjecture too. But nobody can actually argue against the black magic that is going on at CERN. And you'll go going back to this actual video, right, that we watched, and it was the perfect example of how one of these scientists, he's been absolutely blinded by the Church of Pseudoscience, because he's talking about cubes, and like Anthony says, he actually is demonstrating error correction with a cube. You've got values on all the corners of the cube. And then he starts talking about the hypercube, didn't he, Anthony? And this is where you pointed this out. I mean, it was staring him in the face. I had to go back and watch it again, so I got a good laugh at it. But this diagram of the hypercube was made up of absolutely nothing but triangles and tetrahedrons, and he still couldn't see it.
Yeah, exactly. When they ran out the permutations of the steps, geometric steps, and also the numeric steps, there's a 3-1-3 at the beginning. It goes to 7-4 and 3, and then it jumps up to 15, 11, and 3 in terms of the progression. As you run those numbers through the computer, at the step that he was illustrating, it wasn't the final step, but the step that his computer had run at the point of his presentation was to 128, meaning that there were 128 points on this geometric shape. Well, the geometric shape that he was showing was my 600-cell tetrahedron, my model of the universe. He didn't realize, looking at it, that this circle that was divided up into a very complex shape was full of tetrahedrons. The circle was full of tetrahedrons. The 128 points, the 128 error-correcting points, or vertices they're called, were actually forming tetrahedrons. It was staring him in the face. If he had looked inside this 128 tetrahedral circle, because it was two-dimensional, he would see the tetrahedrons right there and realize, instead of going 1, 2, 3 steps to arrive at a solution, he could use the tetrahedrons in there and go 1, 2. He only had to follow 2 lines to arrive at a solution point. So you're right, Kev. It is amazing how their blinders are on. But Maybe that's by design. Maybe they are being blinded to these solutions because God created the geometry. Now I'm going to step back for a moment. There are many people, especially in the Christian community, who have heard me make these types of presentations about geometry before. And they point the finger at me and say, you're talking about sacred geometry. Now, you guys know from listening to me, I'm all about defining words and terms. If you look up sacred geometry, you will see that, yes, they assign it to little g gods and deities and communication with, but it also in the definition assigns it to God the Creator. So what I'm saying here, my position as a Christian is that I am using God's original geometry, his original mathematics, which was hijacked by Satan and his practitioners in the New Age and counterfeited. What I'm doing is turning it back around to the source, the 360 now, all the way back to God and saying, this is the geometry of God. But you know what? I think these guys, like the one that we're talking about, who's stuck on the cube and sees the 128 tetrahedral shape in a circle, and he can't see it. If he had the Holy Spirit, he'd see the tetrahedrons and understand what I'm talking about, that you don't need 3 steps to error correction, you only need 2. So that's where I'm at, Kev.
And it's hilarious because this cat's literally telling you to look at the diagram while he himself obviously isn't looking at it. And if he's looking at it, he just doesn't have the eyes to see it because he continues talking about cubes. And like Anthony says, all that is staring you on the face is triangle after triangle. And there wasn't a cube in sight, Tony. There really wasn't. But to build further on this kind of ternary numbering system, this coding system, Anthony, another thing that made a lot more sense today is when you start using this in these recurrent neural networks, because what it was explaining was sometimes it's a bit limited if we're just working with ones and zeros, classical bits that's either yes or no. And sometimes you want to attribute other values to that. You don't just look for a 1 and a no, and you also want at times to retain history of the decisions that neuron has made before. And this is where it gets really, really practical to have a 3-base number system, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Here's the deal. You just said history. Now, we're talking about a feedback loop. We're talking about machines that are teaching themselves, okay, that are going back and feeding the information to themselves to self-teach, to self-program, quite literally. And therefore, when you look at a system of binary zeros and ones, you're not able to retain the history. And I want people to hold that word history in their mindset, because that is our segue into the second hour when we talk about the Mandela effect. Because Mandela effect has everything to do with binary and trinary, specifically trinary. So it has to do with history. Now, when you are trying to program a computer in a recursive neural network system of feedback loop, self-teaching, deep machine learning, which is what the advanced AI systems are using, RNN. When you're doing that, you don't use a binary system. The binary system applies to feed forward a linear progression of arriving at a solution. It's a 9-step process in most cases. The 10th step is your solution. It's like a filter system of finer and finer filters through each of the 9 steps. That's a feed-forward linear process. Works great with ones and zeros, binary. But what makes more sense in the recursive neural network, which is a continuous loop, is that all of the steps are connected backwards in history to each other. All of the bits are connected. Therefore, they can freely communicate forwards and backwards. It's not linear. It's a loop model. In order to do that, you have to have the three numbers. You have to have the trinary, the -1, the 0, and the 1. It comes down to the three laws of thought, and we'll get into that in a moment. But the three laws of thought apply in computer programming in the recursive neural network system, which is also utilizes the Boltzmann machine. Now, recursive neural network Boltzmann machine is all in my June and July and August issues of Entangled magazine. If you want the deep explanation, just read my magazine. Go ahead, Kev.
Absolutely. And, a kind of way for people to visualize this is, it was Eric Schmidt. He was talking about AI and these RNN, these neural networks, the feedback ones that actually teach themselves. And what he was saying was they were trying to teach it to differentiate between images of cats and dogs. And what you needed for this was a basic level 15 neural network. And like Anthony's saying there, it's always remembering what it's done in the past, and it's a constant loop. Now, the images that it showed you was it got it wrong the first time. And then what happens is it remembers the sequence of events or the decisions that it took that led to a wrong answer. And each one of these levels, one was looking at maybe the area where the eyes were, one was looking at the kind of outline of the animal. And you can imagine how that builds up over time. And then that is how one of these neural networks then learns, because when it does get it wrong, in fact, that's quite beneficial because it's always a learning process, Anthony, isn't it?
It is. So let's go back to the origins of theyve with their prototypes, back to, say, a 64-qubit prototype. What they were doing in their combinatorial programming, in which they're taking all probable solutions and combining them together, they were also taking into account decoherence, which is errors in computer programming. They actually were able to utilize the errors in their combinatorial programming rather than trying to write a error correction code. They sidestepped that in the early development. What that means is they saved a lot of processing time in the qubit chipset by not having to build in a lot of extra coding that required time and steps to self-correct the errors. They went ahead and took the errors themselves and used it in a feedback loop. Again, I'm going back to my conjecture that they have always been using the ternary numerical system, composed of trinary digits. A trinary digit is a trit, T-R-I-T. Okay, that's a ternary digit. A qubit is a quantum bit. These are conjunctions of words that they've brought together to shorten it down. So we're talking qubits and we're talking trits. They have always, I believe, because they're utilizing decoherence, they have always been using this feedback loop process as they've been advancing in the development of AI. And one of the things from way back in the history, perhaps, Kev, when you were just a little guy, is something called fuzzy logic. Now, I think a lot of people in the audience that are of my age will go, oh, yeah, I haven't heard much about fuzzy logic in a long, long time. What's your reaction to that, Kev?
Fuzzy logic, that's what I operate on, Anthony. Everything's all kind of fuzzy around the edges, you know that. But no, I have heard of fuzzy logic because I'm into computers, stuff like that. I have heard of it, but like you say, it's been a long, long time since anyone's brought that into the discussion.
Yeah, the easy way to describe fuzzy logic is rather than saying yes, no in your programming, it includes a maybe. In other words, it's intuitive. Give you an example, the bullet trains in Japan were actually programmed and had chipsets that had fuzzy logic programming built into the operating system of their train. There are many other examples of this, but what this does is it takes almost intuitively things that don't necessarily have to be absolute and allow a little bit of variation to take place. This is a very primitive first step in AI. So So that's why I bring it into the discussion at all, because many people will remember fuzzy logic. And I want to say, that's the foundation of this. And again, that goes back into this recursive neural network system of today in the advanced AI. Fuzzy logic was feeding back information to itself, even in those days.
Fuzzy logic, almost the freedom of choice, free will. Dare we say it? Back after the break, we'll get to more of this back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kev Baker. You're tuned into tonight's Kev Baker Show right here on what I consider the only network that matters, tfrlive.com. Big shout out, whatever medium you're listening to us on. Can't believe it. Your continued support, it will always, absolutely always blow me away. Now, I hope you're ready to get back into it with Mr. Anthony Patch. Check him out over at anthonypatch.com. I've got a semi-cold cup of tea in front of me. I'll get a coffee on the next break. But before we get back into it, don't forget Johnny Whistles. He will be joining the people in the chat room very soon, and he'll be here live for all of you as well on KBS later tonight. And tomorrow night, big night. We all love the nights with Ben Emlyn Jones. I call him our guy from the X-Files. He's Ben X. He is the Ben X-Files. Well, not 1 hour tomorrow night. He is going to be here for 2 hours on KBS. And for anyone who hasn't heard the good news, the brilliant news, that's right, KBS is now a 2-hour show. They have created an absolute monster here at the network. I am loving it. And it lets myself and Anthony and Whistles, when he comes along as well, put out so much more information, because we don't have to rush through the endless list of topics that we've always got to cover. And I, for one, Tony, I'm really enjoying this more slowed down, relaxed kind of approach to it. And I think we're getting a far higher level of information out there to the audience now as well. So it's just win-win.
Yeah, and we do this for the audience's benefit, and I'm glad that people are staying with us, even though we're getting really technical in many of our presentations. But from the information that I get through emails, I think this is what people are really, looking to you and I for, because they really don't get it anywhere else.
Absolutely. And I pretty much get the same emails. They do love it. And like I've said before, I for one was worried. I mean, I love this kind of information, but it's very niche. It's very kind of specific. And I was worried it didn't translate over to the audience. But, I should have known, Tony, because the people that you appeal to, they're just like me. And there are so many technology kind of geeks out there right now. And why not? Because the world we're moving into and the world we're living today, it's dominated by our technology. Our lives are ruled by technology. And at the very cutting edge, the tip of the spear of that, it's AI. And that's what we cover best.
It is. And that's why we're talking about this, recursive neural network programming and trying to give really the drill down, the definitions of what AI is really all about. And we went all the way back to fuzzy logic, and now we're all the way back up here at the leading edge of the tip of the spear of AI, so that people really understand the layers that are involved. You can't just say AI and apply it to, your toaster and your washing machine and say it's all interconnected to the internet and leave it at that. You really have to understand how many variations and applications there are to AI. And what we're trying to do is show you the top level AI while we touch a little bit on history like we do with fuzzy logic. And we're going into the geometry again. And that has to do with if folks want to type this in to their search engine, we're going to the Sierpinski triangle, the Sierpinski gasket, and the Sierpinski tetrahedron. Again, I keep coming up with more confirmations of my model of the universe being comprised of tetrahedrons. So let's start with that. Let's go to Sierpinski. I will spell this for you. Again, Sierpinski. Now, Sierpinski comes up with a tetrahedron that he abbreviates and calls a tetrix. So we've gone from Trits to tetrix. It sounds like crackers to me. It's a three-dimensional analog of the Sierpinski triangle. Now, a Sierpinski triangle is a two-dimensional object that is a single triangle, and inside are as many possible triangles that you can pack into that area. That's the short definition. There are other versions of it, but basically it's a large triangle with a whole bunch of other triangles packed into it. Two-dimensional. If you go to a tetrahedron, it's a whole bunch of tetrahedrons packed into one large tetrahedron. Again, like a pyramid with a triangular base is a tetrahedron. This, if you go into Wikipedia, type in Sierpinski tetrahedron, you'll see the image that I'm referring to, a red tetrahedron and a blue one. This represents the process that I've described with Kev for many years now about the replication, spontaneous replication of tetrahedrons that caused the expansion of the universe rather than a Big Bang. If you are looking at a singular tetrahedron, a single polytope enclosing a space or a volume, that's the most simple geometric shape that naturally arises in mathematics, is a tetrahedron. If you imagine that as the starting point of the universe, the singularity, and then through a process of division of that first tetrahedron, it then multiplies, just like our biological cells in our bodies multiply through division. So do the tetrahedrons of the universe. So what you're seeing with the Sierpinski tetrahedron are models of that replication process of tetrahedrons that expand outward, but at their leading edge, at the event horizon of the expansion of the replication process, at the leading edge event horizon is a singular tetrahedron. Now, expand that out to the model of the universe. You have a sphere, you have a globe that at its leading edge prescribes a globe, but within it are all of these closely packed tetrahedrons, continuously replicating, thus causing the expansion of the universe. The reason I bring it up today in the discussion of computer programming and error correction, utilizing the tetrahedron and the ternary or trinary or ternary digits, the balanced ternary system of -1, 0, and 1, those three numbers prescribe a triangle. In the three-dimensional world, they prescribe the tetrahedron. So your best form of error correction, the fastest, because it's only 2 steps versus 3 with the cube, your fastest, most efficient, most accurate way of correcting errors for recursive neural network deep machine learning is to use the tetrahedral arrangement of the bits. It is exactly the same way that these trits, instead of qubits, which are binary, that theyve always talks about in public being qubits, we're now talking about trits being used to prescribe a singular quantum bit in the shape of a tetrahedron. Thus, as they replicate those trits, they form a computer that is now a sphere, a 600-cell tetrahedron. As a computer, exactly the same as the model of the universe, and it is found at the cosmological scale, and it is found at the quantum scale as empirically proven in science to exist. Tetrahedrons, the elements, the quantum particles, all arrange in tetrahedrons. Therefore, it is also mathematically the most efficient form in programming is the tetrahedral arrangement of -1, 0, and 1 in the ternary digit trit arrangement. That's how you build the most efficient computer, geometrically and physically. That's how you arrange the trits, is in a tetrahedron. And that is how the universe operates, in the same model and in the same function of creating our reality. There you go, Kev.
Where have I heard all this before? A spherical 600 cell or 600 cell quantum computer. Now, Tony, it's almost as if you are putting stuff out. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you put stuff out and then it's later confirmed. But when it comes to your 600 cell model of the universe, it's not so much being confirmed, but everything we come across certainly adds weight to this model that you put forward, and nothing we've come across so far takes away from it.
No, it's like every week we get another piece of information, significant, like this ternary numerical system. Excuse me.
But this is almost back to front, Anthony, because usually you would get the clues or the kind of ingredients first. You would come across this information and from that you would build a theory, right? But no, you came up with a theory and now you're getting the evidence coming at you.
Yeah. It is. I know we laugh at each other because this happens constantly to you and me. And for example, the 600 cell tetrahedron, the model, but also the configuration of the qubits at that time into a computer, I wrote back in 2014 and published in my novel 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. In that novel, I have a 6-foot diameter spherical computer, quantum computer, and a 60-foot. And at that time, I only knew about qubits, quantum bits, and that's what I used in that configuration using those tetrahedrons. Now we come across this ternary. I had never, up until 3 days ago, had never heard of ternary numerical system, the base 3. Now, that may sound ridiculous to people who think that, I'm some kind of genius and I know about computer programming and come up with all this stuff. Well, no, quite honestly, it just takes a lot of digging, a lot of hours of research, and this is what Kev and I have come up with just over the weekend. And it's another confirmation that the 600 cell tetrahedron definitely is the model of the universe, because it works in programming, it works in the physical arrangement of quantum particles and the arrangement of not only just the solar system, but it accounts for the arrangement of stars in nebula. And I'm looking at Tony Phillips in the chat room. He says, why do computers go from, let me get this back real quick because it is important. Yeah. Why do computers go from 8, 16, 32, 64, 128? Tony, great comment, because this ties right into what we're talking about. Okay, the 128-bit is the same geometric shape. The 128 that I was talking about before the break comprised the tetrahedrons that this computer software engineer was talking about, the 128 as a geometric representation of their error correction code, and he missed the whole thing about the tetrahedrons. The reason that they go through that, it is the power of 2. So Tony Phillips, 33, it is the power of 2, and that is exactly the number of qubits used in the theyve computer models as they move all the way up to the 14th model. Okay, I'll give you a quick answer here. The 10th model is the same as a human brain in terms of qubits, and it's 65,536. Now, this gentleman that we're talking about, we're not using his name today, but the computer software engineer came up with 65,533 versus 36 as he was running this 128-bit geometric arrangement of error-correcting software, okay? What he arrived at when he got to 128, the number that came out of that, and I'm being very simplistic here, was 65,533 instead of 36. He was 3 digits off of the exact number of tubulin dimers in the human brain. So the error correction software he was running, utilizing a cube form of arranging binary numbers, was almost correct, but not quite. If he would run it as a ternary, a balanced ternary system of 3 in a tetrahedral arrangement of those digits, then he would arrive at 65,536 instead of 33. Go ahead, Kev.
That dude had a triangle phobia. He couldn't even see the things. If you hit him with a 3 and tell him to start thinking that way, Anthony, he is going to absolutely shatter into a million pieces. He really is. And, you know, just looking at the chat room there, that question alone, and I was going to say, you know, these tubulin dimers that you refer to, the best way, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the best way to really think about a tubulin dimer is like a quantum bit. It literally is the quantum neurons that go to make up our brains, right?
It is. And in the description that you and I have read and referred to so many times about the tubulin dimers, that they're a binary pair, a 0 and a 1, I'm going to say conjecture again. Okay? I always tell you when I read something that I consider to be factual evidence and empirical evidence, but when I step out into the realm of conjecture, I always preface it, and that's what I'm doing now. My next direction in research is to say, I believe the tubulin dimers are not binary. I think the audience can already guess. They're ternary. They're balanced ternary. There's not 2 tubulin dimers, but 3 tubulin dimers within each microtubule. Now, there's 10 to the 19th power, I think it is, 10 to the 19th power of tubulin dimers within one microtubule, and 10 to the 19th power, 10 to the 38th power, I think it is, of tubulins within one neuron. I'm trying to go off of memory here, so don't hold me to those numbers, but it's a huge number, to say the least. And I believe that we're not looking at binary pairs of dimers. We're looking at a triple arrangement. I believe that the dimers are arranged as a tetrahedron. And that's what is contained within the tubulins themselves, because the tubulins are made up of Buckminster-Fuller buckyballs. They're made up of Buckminster-Fullerenes arranged into a tube. That's a microtubule within a human neuron. The C60 carbon that makes up the microtubules, the Buckminster-Fullerenes. If you look at one single buckyball, it is the same thing as Buckminster-Fuller's tetrahedrally shaped geodesic dome, and therefore geometric and geodesic sphere. What I'm saying is, if you get down to a single buckyball that comprises the tube, which is the microtubule, it is exactly like a Buckminster geodesic dome or geodesic sphere comprised of tetrahedrons. You cannot get away from the tetrahedrons. They keep coming up no matter the scale of what you're examining. Go ahead, sir.
That's the same as when they're working on artificial stuff, nanotechnology. They build these nanotubes, and they're exactly the same. They're constructed of the triangles, the tetrahedrons. It's the most natural form, but write it on a piece of paper or something, folks. We are going to find out, I would say in the next 3 to 6 months, that it's not binary or quantum ones and zeros in our brain. It is going to be this new ternary kind of system that we're talking about tonight. And again, I think it's key to note that when we talk about the whole quantum biology within our brains, Anthony, this was the starting block, the literal starting place for D-Wave. Because before the money was ever there to do anything, and before, I think it was just after he'd been working in the world of superconductivity, right enough, you've got Easy Eric Ladzinski, one of the founders of D-Wave. He is looking at the inner workings of the brain before he even gets going on the D-Wave, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they patterned the progression of their model numbers by the power of 2, because power of 2 is the natural binary system that is used in computer programming. And therefore, they matched the number of qubits to how they were programming using a binary system. And they advanced the number of qubits by a power of 2 to work in lockstep to that. But they were working towards that, let's call it the significant model number 10, as I cited earlier, the number of qubits matching the number of tubulin dimers at 65,536. That's a very significant tipping point, because from that point on is where I believe they began to employ the ternary system, the arrangement of qubits, but not more accurately now we're calling them trits, arranging trits in a tetrahedral arrangement from the 10th model on up to the 14th model. And I believe from the 10th model to the 14th, they were all not the cube that we see, not the black cube that theyve puts out, but I believe it is that spherical arrangement of tetrahedrons in which they've arranged the trits. I believe, and that's conjecture on my part, but I believe just looking at these pieces of evidence from a programming language, from a physical geometric arrangement of matter, from looking at the human brain, the biology, if you will, and we've talked about warm and wet qubits before, that they have already produced. This is room temperature superconducting warm and wet qubits that are at room temperature quantum entangled. That all occurs from the 10th model to the 14th model. So I want folks to understand they have, in my estimation, they have moved to a biological quantum computer starting at the 10th model and inclusive up to the 14th model. So go ahead.
You know, it just blows me away sometimes. It really does, because when I first got into this, I used to listen to a lot of David Icke, and I still listen to a lot of David Icke, really, but he was the first one who really explained, or I heard explaining, the brain being like a processing unit, like a computer, right? And if you look at our bodies, they are very much like a computer, because you've got the brain as the CPU, you've got your eyes like webcams taking in information, data, which is processed by the CPU, your ears doing the same thing. Now, DNA, you've got a storage medium as well, but is it just me that is absolutely blown away and bamboozled by the fact that in our brains, we've got 65,336 tubulin dimers. Not 55,335, not 65,337, but there's 65,336.
536.
536, Anthony, which just happens to be on this scale from the power of 2. Is it just me that's blown away by that?
Yeah, when I first encountered that a couple of years ago, it really surprised me too. And we shared it on the show, almost 2 years ago, I believe. And again, we're at the tip of the spear, my friend. I still haven't heard anyone else talk about this. And I think it's because you and I just do the research. And that's really what's reflected in our Entangled magazine, is the deep research. We're still not giving you the deepest material here on the air because time just doesn't allow, and you've got to have the paper in front of you. You need to see the images on the paper. So if you would help Kev and myself by subscribing to Entangled magazine, that would keep us moving forward in this deep research we do. But where we're going after the break, and we're going to bring Johnny Whistles in, is we're going to talk about the Mandela effect. But Kev just gave you a little example, a little taste of it. We're going to talk about DNA and DNA memories as they relate to all of this that we just set the stage up with in talking about Trits. We're going to talk about the Mandela effect and DNA. Take it away, bud.
No, this is huge. This really is. Maybe we should have a fanfare about this, because for me, when you started explaining this to me today, something seemed to sink in. And we've talked Mandela effects, and we've put out that theory, that term quantum pollution. Well, after the break, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to hear the actual process. It's going to make so much more sense now. What's happening, how we're being gamed, how they're changing things. And it's thanks to the work of Anthony Patch, because he's the guy that puts all of this together. And like I say, I like to think I'm almost like a representation of the audience out there. And when I read this today, I really got it. And what I'm saying is I think all of you are going to get it as well. And like Tony said, we're going to be joined by the man himself, Mr. Johnny Whistles. He's been hanging out in the chat room. He's getting bought cups of coffee by the audience. That guy, he really does. He milks this whole semi-famous thing, you know, Tony. Is Anthony there? Have we lost Anthony? Oh, that's...
Oh, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, I'm watching Johnny Whistle's antics in the chat room. He's getting tea. I think I'm doing this all wrong, you know, Tony.
No, he's the more famous guy. Hey, we're taking a back seat, baby. We're in the rumble seat in the Model T.
It definitely is. But like I say, folks, we will be back after the break. We'll get into more of these Mandela effects. We'll really explain it. We said it was going to go mainstream. Oh, man, it's going mainstream and then some. But, of course, don't forget, tomorrow night, Ben Emlyn-Jones for 2 hours right here, the Ben X-Files. He will be live. I'm going to go and get myself a cup of coffee, or more appropriately, I'm hoping Anne's going to get me a cup of coffee, and we'll be back after these short messages. 1 hour down, 1 hour to go on the all-new 2-hour Kev Baker Show, right here on tfrlive.com. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
So we are back live already. I told you it'd be a quick break, and I also promised you coming up live in our number 2 of the Kev Baker Show tonight would be your main man. That's right, the legend himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Johnny Whistles. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, Kev. Thanks very much. Good listening to you and Tony and talking about these. Wow, I don't know how many ahedrons is that, Kev?
Come on, don't lie, Johnny. I was watching you in the chat room, and you're like the PR guy for KBS. You really do give us this personal touch. I'm laughing about it, John, but I tell you, I appreciate it so much because the motto of the network is real people, real radio. And you're the realest guy I know about here, Johnny. You really are. So what's happening in your chat room anyway?
I think there's a coffee in Morrison's with Gabby and her man on Thursday. So, yeah, look forward to that, mate. So,
Coffee?
Yeah, it's the good stuff, Kev. No, that cheap rubbish.
No, the cheap rubbish, Johnny, the good stuff?
Oh, no, this is the good stuff. This is the one that actually gives you a moustache, you know, that fantastic.
Well, John, you will be pleased to hear, right? And before we even go anywhere, let me take this opportunity to thank you and big you up for Freaky Friday because, wow, Johnny, you took the Freaky Friday bull by the horns and you steered us for a full 3 hours, man. That was great stuff. Where did that come from, Johnny?
I don't know, Kev. I seem to have a kind of a new wee boost as it is because my sleeping's good, Kev. I'm feeling good. And, yeah, everything's changing for the better, mate.
Good. That is what I like to hear. And, of course, Johnny will be joining us in the second hour most nights if he can make it because of work now. And I, for one, and I know all of you out there are very, very appreciative of that. And, Johnny, you'll be pleased to hear, right? We're about to go back into the strange world of the Mandela effects. I love to build up, but we're also joined tonight by Mr. Anthony Patch, anthonypatch.com. Tony, Mandela effects. It's the subject we love to hate or hate to love. I don't know which one it is anymore, but we have been talking about it again recently. We were saying how we were expecting this to go very mainstream because what's happening is here we're on a kind of curve, and people like ourselves and the alternative media, you termed or deemed the early adopters, maybe about 10% of us or so. But for this PSYOP and for the eventual goals to be achieved, then what they need to do is they need to take it mainstream. They want to get it out there into the public eye, and they are really going for it because we played Jeff Dunham on the show on Friday night. There's also Fermi Labs. They've put a video out ridiculing the subject, as we said would happen. And now even Fox News, Tony, they're getting in on this as well.
Yeah, we laid out the bell curve, if you will, of the psychological operation known as the Mandela effect. And we're going to get into the real nuts and bolts of how that is happening. I've termed it quantum pollution because of accessing, as Gordy Rose says, parallel dimensions. But as I said earlier in the show, these are concentric dimensions because it is dimensions formed by tetrahedrons comprising a sphere. And standing inside the middle of that sphere and looking towards the event horizon, you would see nothing but tetrahedrons. And each tetrahedron is a dimension within that curved space. Therefore, they are like concentric circles moving outwards. Therefore, they are concentric dimensions, not parallel. Parallel is your cube model. Go ahead.
I think it's really important here as well that, this term quantum pollution, we really got that from Gordy Rose himself. And I mean that because he was the guy that was talking about the fact that they do utilize these parallel realities, a mind-boggling number of them. And what happens is the answers, the solutions come back, plus resources, and then there's a 10% excess of information, data, geometry, mathematics, whatever you want to call it, that comes back from that other dimension as well. And it's that 10%, that is what we dubbed quantum pollution. And tonight, I'm really hoping the audience gets a visualization like I did today when you take this further and explain how this leads to things like the Mandela effect.
Well, let's get into it then, because we set the stage talking about this base 3 system, the ternary numerical system. Specifically, the manifestation of that is called the balanced ternary system. And that is the -1, 0, and +1. Now, I should point out that the 0, much like the fuzzy logic that I referred to as the early iteration of AI, depends on a variable. Fuzzy, as the name implies, is variable. In this situation, the 0 is the what-if variable. Typically, a -1 and a +1 would say yes or no. It is or it is not. And the 0 is your variable. It's the what-if area in this balanced ternary system of 3 numbers, the base 3. So I'm going to sidestep a little bit and talk about how consciousness, more specifically thought, is prescribed in 3 laws. This is called the 3 laws of thought. The first law is the law of identity. That means whatever is. That's the first law, is the law of identity. Whatever is. The second law is the law of non-contradiction. Nothing can be and not be. Nothing can be and not be. It's the second law. The third law is the law of the excluded middle. Everything must be or not be. In other words, you're excluding anything in the middle. So the third law is everything must either be or not be. The middle is 0, which represents nothing. In this case, it can be variable. What I'm giving to you is the definition of thought, or the laws of thought, because we're going into talking about defining consciousness. Last week, we said AI, because it's independent, it's developed its own language and other forms of independence. is about to define, if it hasn't already, but in the public world is about to define consciousness according to its perspective, a non-anthropomorphic, a non-human perspective of consciousness. Therefore, what I'm offering to you is that if they're operating with a system of -1 and then 0 as a variable and +1, they're rewriting the laws of thought. In fact, they're eliminating most of these laws. And what they're coming down to is they're going to have one single law of consciousness. Now, I'll let you jump in here, Kev, and then we are going to talk about the recurrent neural network and how it applies to the Mandela effect.
So, Johnny, I'll bring you in here, right? And what Anthony's saying there is, I mean, instead of it being to be or not to be, it's going to be or not to be, or maybe in the middle as well. Moving into this kind of trinary stuff, Johnny. Johnny's used already.
But the thing is, the Mandela effect is, I mean, that's bad enough. But this trinary thing is got me a bit, Kev. This one I'm going to have to look at because...
Well, Johnny, if it's any consolation, like I shared with the audience earlier, it smacked me right between the eyeballs like a piece of 2x2 wood. It really did, because it's something I hadn't seen before, and it took me a little while to get my head round. But what we're moving into here now with these neural networks, Tony, and this to be, not to be, or maybe, that this is something that I was seeing when I was looking into these, is it recurrent neural networks today?
Yep.
They're very big fans of this because, again, like we were explaining in the first part of the show, this gives them so many more options. They're able to categorize things, and it's got that self-learning ability, self-correcting.
Yeah, it does. And so they're going to come out with their own law of consciousness, and we'll have to wait and see what their definition is or their law is going to be. But if you take into account the fact that 0 is a variable, then they are going to be able to say, I believe, rather than everything must either be, which is a 1, or not be, which is a -1, they're going to say that it can also be 0. It can be a closed loop. It can be a continuous loop. Now, remember that software engineer that we were looking at his presentation on, and he was talking about the endless loop, that it never ends until it gets to 0. If people want to think about this as, in terms of geometry, as a fractal form of a process of software movement, in other words, electrons flowing through a superconductor, and it does it in a circular fashion. Within the world of theyve, they have two oppositely moving streams of electrons in the chip. Those electrons move in both directions at the same time, and they are therefore superpositioned, the electrons, and can be in a state of 1 or 0. What we're adding into that discussion now is the 0 itself in the middle as a variable state of superposition. Now, this is completely new information, Kev. A variable state of superposition in which a 1 can be 0 and 1, or a 0 can be a -1 and a 1, or a 1 can be a 0 and a -1. We have three things that can be superimposed, superposition now, instead of just two things. So we're talking about superposition as related to 3, again, the tetrahedron in geometry, in a closed loop within a chip that is comprised of trits, not qubits. Now I'm going to stop for just a moment and let that sink in. But superposition used to be 0 could also be a 1, and a 1 could also be a 0 at the same time. That's what theyve has put out forever as their way that their operating system functions. What I'm offering to you today is it is 3 numbers in a state of superposition, not just 2. So go ahead.
No, I was looking at something today as well where they had literally observed this because they were saying they were looking at multiple spin rates within the same one. And I mean, we talk about this superposition, but this was in many superpositions at once, Tony, or it was showing many different, or at least 2 different values at once, even when being observed. So this is something totally different, and it's something that they are utilizing in these neural networks right now, because some of the stuff I was reading today, it's coming from papers and stuff like that, but it certainly is something that these scientists are definitely working on.
Yeah, and again, we're connecting dots here. We're just looking at the basic mathematics, and we've moved into a new area of mathematics, ternary, using Trits. And so we're starting to pull these things together into a new context of understanding. So let's go ahead. I'm going to read this note that I sent to you just to make it clean and concise for people. I wrote to you earlier just before the show, and I said, just suppose the Mandela effect being a test of recurrent neural network programming of people, okay? Recurrent neural network programming of people. What I mean is various forms, each slightly different, of recurrent neural network programming are being tested on the public. Now I'm going to define that. The -1, I'm writing it out in text. -1 means some don't see any changes, even when asked. The 0 is described as some have never been asked to look for changes and have no clue of the Mandela effect. And then the +1, some on their own see the changes, recalling their memories of things as they used to be. Again, the balanced ternary of -1, 0, and 1 as applied to the Mandela effect psychologically. I'll repeat this in a minute, but go ahead, Kev, with your comment on this.
No, I'm just listening to you there, Tony, because like I say, when you hit me with that today, that does make a lot of sense. And when you go through those 3 states there, or those 3 separate groups, I would say that pretty much encapsulates the 3 groups that are at play here. And when we go into the next bit about how they're actually able to do this is the bit that fascinates me, and it ties in with my body-computer kind of scenario in the previous segment, where the DNA comes into all of this. So I'll give it back to you, Tony, because I don't know where you want to go next, because even for me, this is all kind of new stuff. But like I said, when you explained how this quantum pollution, which we just kind of threw out there a term, how this is actually used or how it translates into these changes that people are experiencing, well, I think there's a lot to this. I really do.
Pardon me. Yeah. So if we look at the laws of thought that I laid out, the laws of consciousness, if you will, and I said that AI is going to redefine consciousness. It's going to come up with its own laws of thought from its perspective. I offer to you the Mandela effect as the AI's perspective on consciousness, and it is testing its version of consciousness on the public, on the human population. And it is rewriting the laws of thought that philosophers came up with. And I'm offering to you the new 3 laws of thought, the new consciousness of the AI, as that consciousness is manifest as the Mandela effect. So again, I'm going to read these 3 that I've come up with, because this is derived, these 3 laws are derived in their description from the balanced ternary system of 3 numbers. The -1, some don't see any changes, even when they're asked. The 0, Some have never been asked to look for changes and have no clue that it even exists. And the plus one, is some on their own see the changes, recalling their memories of things as they used to be. So you have a positive and you have a negative, and then you have people in the middle who have no clue about the Mandela effect. Some people, if they're asked, the negative one, hey, do you see some changes? And they'll say, no, I don't see any changes. In the positive one, people on their own, like you and I and many thousands, perhaps millions of people, have noticed on their own changes, and they have their memories intact, the history intact to do the comparative analysis, and they remember how things used to be. They're the plus one people. But the zero in the middle, which is variable, they've never even been asked, nor do they have any clue that the Mandela effect even exists in the world. This takes us back to this bell curve of awareness of pushing the psychological test. I call it a psychological operation, but pushing this test onto the public until it reaches a tipping point at the top of the bell curve. And I said several days ago with you, Kev, watch, and it will eventually, very soon, hit the mainstream media, the Mandela effect. And bingo, it sure did today. I'm going to let you jump in here, but when you come back, I'm going to come back from your comments here, and I'm going to get, again, more specific with these three numbers. So go ahead.
No, like Anthony says, there, it did hit Fox News, and they're talking about false memories, misremembering, recombination of memories as well, and collective remembering, where groups of people just remember the wrong things. And it's that recombination, that kind of stuck out to me, because when we're looking at the D-wave and the form of computing that it does, it's combinatorial mathematics. So there's combinatorial, and then we've got this guy talking about recombination of fragments of memories. And Anthony, we've got about 5 minutes before the break, but that video alone, very telling. And again, just like you were saying, they were rubbishing the whole kind of Mandela effect. And that's exactly what you said would happen.
Yeah, it is. And they bring in, their quote experts. So you've got this, psychologist, whatever, and he's talking in this language, and I'm going to give the words. He's talking about false memories, cultural false memories, collective remembering. That if the group compares notes and they say, oh yeah, we all remember it being spelled this way, and then the group says, oh, but it all looks like this. Look at the changes. Okay, that's the plus one. Some on their own, they see the changes, recalling their memories of things as they used to be. That's the plus one. That's an example of collective remembering. And then he used the phrase recombination, as you just pointed out. And that harkens to the combinatorial programming of D-Wave that they utilize when they access these other dimensions and extract the resources. They talk about grabbing resources in their words, and therefore bringing them into this reality and revising our reality. The title of my third book, Revising Reality. It's not by chance that he used the word recombination, because if you look up recombination, it is not in the vernacular of psychology. It's a made-up word, and yet he's a psychologist. Go ahead, Kev.
Well, as part of my rehab after the heart attack, I had to visit the psychologist, right? And I wasn't too impressed at all, because these people obviously go to university for years on end, right? But all they actually do is repeat back to you the very same thing that you've said, only in a condescending, childish voice.
Yeah.
Psychology, it's total quackery to me, Tony. It really is.
Yeah, I agree with you. It really is. We've got about 3 minutes, so I'm going to just go again, and I'm going to read this balanced ternary because we're working in threes today. Some don't see any changes even when asked. Some have never been asked to look for changes and have no clue of the Mandela effect. some on their own see the changes, recalling their memories of things as they used to be. I'm repeating those so that people can write it down, because this is what I think you're going to see coming out when they start to try to explain some of this, because this is all about computer programming. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about what these resources mean, what that definition is, because we're all about defining and being specific. We are talking about computer programming that is causing the Mandela effect, and then we'll get into the biological aspect of that. So you wrap it up, Kevin. We'll go to break.
Oh, fantastic. And Johnny, I'll come to you, right? Because I know that we are both fascinated, pervertedly so, over these Mandela effects, right? And we shouldn't, because it's all part of a game. But I'm sure you, like me, you've been introducing this topic to people probably at your work, right? I don't know. But what's the general kind of feeling when you introduce people? Do they fit into these three categories that Tony's describing here?
Excuse me. The first one I spoke to, Kev, had actually said that it's just our memories. It's the wrong memories of our memories. And the thing is, when she answered that, I didn't want to bring quantum physics into it, so I left her alone. But the people that I got was with the usual one, Kev, magic mirror on the wall that nobody has ever heard of before. But that one got everybody thinking, and I explained what the Mandela effect was, when it started and how it got the name, kind of thing. And they were really, really interested, because they started to look for ones that they could find themselves. The one like Looney Tunes, which is now, Looney Tunes now. It used to be Looney Tunes, but they remember all these things. So it's actually great to get them actually looking at it, because they will tell people when they are absolutely flummoxed by one that they find themselves.
And you know, Johnny, Fox News, they chose our favourite one, Queen, We Are the Champions. They were playing that. People were losing their minds. And that's what it's all designed to do, folks, because I entitled the part on Mandela effects that we done with Anthony the other night on his show, Mandela 451. And that's obviously play on the words Fahrenheit 451, a book by Ray Bradbury, in which they literally burn the written record. And right now what we're watching is a technological book burning, because they are revising our reality. And to how they do that, well, join us after the break. Mr. Patch will explain it all. Don't go anywhere. One segment to go right here on KBS Live on tfrlive.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
We are back, and you're tuned into the Kev Baker Show right here on tfrlive.com. Don't forget, you can check my work out over at kevbakershow.com. You can find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm viral out there, YouTube as well. You name the medium, there's going to be some KBS on it. There really is. And of course, tonight I'm joined by my good friend, co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles, and a fellow co-host on a Monday, a Wednesday, and then I play his co-host on a Friday, Mr. Anthony Patch. And isn't it kind of universally ironic? I've got one of those little smiles on my face that tonight we're sitting talking about ternary. This is basically easier way to think of it. Trinary code, working in threes. And I was just having a laugh with these two brilliant gents during the break, because Monday night I always sound like I'm half asleep. I've still got the weekend blues in me. Hard to get me going. Then the music kicks in, right? And I'm fine. Love it. Myself and Tony, we were kind of panicking. Will we go into these deep topics, etc.? And then just as we're speaking about binary swapping for trinary, you get Johnny Whistles coming into the mix, and he gives us a fresh impetus. We work best in three, boys. We really do. See, Tony, it's almost like proving the rule to what we're saying tonight.
It's our own psychological programming. We're the ternary team now, buddy.
The ternary team. I like that. You know, People will be probably taken to Photoshops and the meme makers right now. But this is the bit that I am really keen to get into because, like I say, we were explaining on previous shows about quantum pollution, this 10% of extra resources that pervades into our reality. Now, it was one thing talking about quantum pollution and then saying it leads to the Mandela effects. But now you came up with a really good theory today as to the physical process of how this may be occurring, Anthony. So I want you to take it away and present it to the audience.
All righty. If you would like the full write-up on the things that Kevin, I, and Johnny have presented today, it'll be in the September issue of Entangled magazine. I'll put in all the details. I'll put in the 3 rules or laws that I just read off 3 times. I won't read it again, but the balanced ternary of the Mandela effect. People have asked Kevin, myself, many times, why is it that not everyone is experiencing this Mandela effect? Why aren't they seeing the changes? Well, those 3 laws that I just presented to you, I think, somewhat explains that, but we're going to go a little deeper into that. And that is, I've said that this is a psychological operation that is born out of the quantum pollution coming from other dimensions. To be very specific, I believe that the psychological operation is a test of the AI recurrent neural network programming of people, not just RNN as applied to the AI computer systems. But I believe that they're testing this endless loop, this feedback loop, this self-programming, self-learning of deep machine learning. They're applying that same process on people. And they are testing the reactions, the responses, the behavior. We've talked about algorithms built upon observations of human behavior, therefore leading to the prediction of human behavior, therefore leading to the control of people through this observation producing algorithms. Now we have the algorithms within an endless loop process. They are targeting 3 groups of people utilizing this balanced ternary programming system, this trinary system, the ternary process. They are targeting, based upon the 3 laws that I just gave you, they are targeting a group you would consider to be the -1, the group that would be the 0, and the group that would be the +1. You have 3 target groups that are being tested within their own minds in this endless loop of recurrent neural network programming. Again, understand they are trying to model the human brain within the computer. To test their programming within the computer, they need to also test the programming for accuracy within the human mind. Therefore, the Mandela effect is a psychological operation utilizing people as test rats to make sure that their programming of their AI matches up to the programming, the processing of information within the human mind. They are observing these 3 groups of people, the -1, the 0, and the +1, to see how these people respond to this information that they're feeding into our reality. None of the Mandela effects are physically manifesting in our reality. None of these observed changes are physically occurring. They are only occurring within the quantum computer in our head. They are literally reprogramming people to think differently based upon the balanced ternary form of programming. Now that's very complex. I'll lay it out in the article that's coming out in the September issue of Entangled. But literally that's what they're doing. Now, where are we going with this? Because It is not just the mind, which is a quantum computer, definitively, even down to the quantum particles and the spin of those quantum particles. Because how you change someone's mind is you change the spin of quantum particles. You change the direction and their angular momentum. That's how you reprogram the mind. But the mind is only a processor. Kev, I'm going to ask you, where's the data storage? Where's the data bank? Where are they storing all the information? Because it's not being stored in the mind, in the brain.
Well, there's a story that proves as evidence of what we're going to say here, and it came out maybe just a couple of weeks ago. And this is where scientists had encoded an hour-and-a-half long movie into the DNA of bacteria. Now, furthermore than that, get this, because 3 generations of bacteria down the line in their DNA, you know that it had that full film in there, still stored. What I'm getting at here is, and like I was saying in the previous segment where I was explaining the body as a computer, when it comes to the storage that we need to use, vast storage, the DNA, Tony, is the perfect place. And like I say, scientists right now, they're utilizing its ability to store data.
Yes, indeed. The DNA is the storage bank. It is the data bank, the data storage, the mainframe in terms of data that has been stored not only from information that's been acquired in the present time, in the lifetime of a person, but it has also been demonstrated that DNA has generational memory. And much of our behavior traits that we see that are similar or matching to our parents and our grandparents derives from those memories, that actual information that is stored in the DNA and handed forward generation to generation. So the information is in the DNA, and I believe that that is where not only are they changing the spin of quantum particles within the brain, the processor, how it operates, but they're also changing the memories. Here we go. The memories in the DNA. And they can affect our DNA because they can change the frequency at which the DNA vibrates, and they can also interrupt and change the direction of the photons within the DNA that actually are the carriers of the information. So DNA modification is not just CRISPR gene splicing, it's not just sequencing of DNA, but is actually going to the DNA itself and modifying the DNA such that you're modifying people's memories. Now, according to the 3 laws that I've put together based on balanced ternary, some of them have a -1, some have a 0, and some have a +1 modification to their DNA. And DNA, folks, is built in a 3-way geometric shape. There it is. DNA is built with tetrahedrons, so it matches up to the 3 laws. Go ahead.
And we often hear Tony and I and Johnny talking about a 3rd strand of DNA. And I remember when I looked into this at the time, I was blown away because Watson and Crick, the 2 guys who were attributed, and they cracked the DNA, they sussed it out. But when they were looking at it, to start with, they actually believed they were looking at, well, here we go again, a trinary, a ternary system, a triple helix. And of course, with all the chemtrailing that goes on right now and all the nanoparticulates that we have all been breathing in, none of us are immune to breathing the air. We all may well already be laced with some kind of 3rd strand of DNA within us. But I'm going to bring in Johnny Whistles here. Johnny, we talk about DNA quite a lot, usually reference to giants, aliens, the past, all that kind of stuff, right? And we often, I wouldn't say share a joke, but we shake our heads at the fact that they call the majority of our DNA junk. Now, what do you think of this, Johnny? This could be where we've also talked about genetic memory in the past, but our literal, our random access memory, shall we call it, the stuff we operate off today, could well be stored down at that DNA level, John.
Oh, it could be, Kev. And you're talking about the DNA strands there. I'm like you, Kev. I'm watching that zoo, and that's got a third strand of DNA, and it's mutating people into. I mean, Kev, these people can move fast. They're strong. Okay, it's more animal-like, but I just wonder why they're actually messing with people's DNA, Kev, because as you say, this DNA, junk DNA, as it is supposed to be, what it is really they haven't found out what it means, but it's not there for nothing.
Exactly, and I think they know fine well what it means and what it's there for, and if we're right with this theory about them affecting us on a kind of DNA level to play with our memories, then, well, I think there's a lot to this. But, Tony, we're talking here, right? Whether it's junk DNA, whether it's our memories, who knows, who cares for the argument of what I'm about to go into, right? Because right now, or in the past week or so, we've had MIT scientists, and what they've done is they've had the first attempt at creating genetically modified human embryos. And it says the effort led by Shukrat Mitalopov of the Oregon Health and Science University involved changing the DNA of a large number of one-cell embryos with gene editing technique CRISPR, according to people familiar with the scientific results. So here we are now, Tony. It's been going on for a while in the UK, this kind of playing about with embryos, creating fully synthetic life. I mean, what's lost in between a natural embryo with all of the DNA and what it means, and then when you start creating synthetic life or splicing bits in and out?
Yeah, again, creation. Let's define creation. From my perspective as a Christian, creation can only occur with God the Creator. What they're doing is taking the already created, let's just call it elements, quantum particles. They're taking the substance that's already in existence, that's been created, and reorganizing it. We talked about sequencing of DNA, being able to, in silico, in the computer, design in the software the arrangement of the amino acids, the building blocks of DNA, any way you want, and create your own biological form of life. What's missing is the soul. What's missing, if it becomes conscious, is actual human consciousness. It is definitely a counterfeit of what God has created. Now, we go back to talking about Dr. Craig Ventnor going back 2 years now, you and me, Kev. And back then we cited the fact that there were competitions in college laboratories with graduate students actually sequencing the building blocks of DNA and creating artificial life forms that theoretically, once the competition was completed, they were destroying these new life forms. Well, we've been seeing more and more articles coming out where they're actually openly talking about the fact and promoting the fact that they're creating new life forms, not new life, but new forms of life. So you can play around with the building blocks all you want, but you're never going to impart human consciousness, sentience, awareness, nor the soul upon these new biological forms. Go ahead.
You know, Johnny, you watch Zoo like I do, and I'm not sure if you've got to the bit where they go to an island called Pangaea yet, but I imagine that's probably like some of the experiments that are going on today. They've probably got some remote island that's more akin to Jurassic Park than anything else, dude. We know what these governments are like, right? And with this technology, Johnny, there's probably centaurs or all sorts running about.
Well, there's the quantum thing kicking in again, Kev, because that was the last episode that we watched. And see, when the camera was panning through, it was like really dense jungle. And I says to June, I says, this is like the start of Jurassic Park. But, yeah, again, Kev, I mean, there's talking about even saber-toothed tigers and all sorts of things. I mean, this is on an island that shouldn't exist. And I'll bet there is a few out there, Kev.
And we've heard the stories where they go and dig up samples of the Black Death or some plague that wiped out so many million of people in the past. They reanimate it, right? And then you're telling me they don't try and reanimate dinosaurs and things like that, and they're not splicing life together? Oh, give me peace. This is exactly the kind of science or weird science that they're definitely getting up to, Tony.
Yeah, if you look back into the Sumerian record, the Babylonian, the ancient Egyptian record, and move right on up through Dee and Kelly, who we oftentimes cite, up to Crowley, into Dr. Craig Ventnor, and all of these other laboratories and scientists that are working on defeating death. You look at Ray Kurzweil from Google. All these guys in Silicon Valley and around the world are all talking about defeating death. And they're doing that in a couple of forms. The quantum computers, this whole idea of, transhumanism and the uploading of your memories and supposed consciousness into a computer, but also the biological end of it, this whole idea of modifying DNA. The whole purpose is defeating death. This is more specifically the resurrection of the dead. Now, in my whole discussion, when I talk about DNA, quantum computers, AI, and CERN, and the opening of the doorway to the bottomless pit, to the abyss, it is literally in all of these records going back thousands of years, it is all focused on resurrection. So I really want to emphasize that. When you look at technology across the spectrum, the full spectrum dominance, as my conference is coming up in September 16th and 17th, this live stream conference that Kev and I are putting on, the full spectrum dominance, which is the theme of this conference, is exactly what I'm talking about as the full spectrum of technology being applied to defeating death and the resurrection, the literal resurrection of the dead. Go ahead.
Oh, pesky mute button. You know what I'm like with these mute buttons, Tony, right? But we talk about cheating death and stuff like that, and I'm going to bring up something here that we mentioned in that previous story, and it's CRISPR-9. Now, this boils down to the both sides of science. It's a double-edged sword again, right? But we've got children that are born with genetic hereditary diseases, Anthony, right? And I could easily make a case for CRISPR-9 being used for that kind of thing to eradicate needless, harmful diseases like that. However, it's a slippery slope, isn't it? And Aldous Huxley warned us, even though it's turning out to be like a script from the Elite's playbook now with Brave New World, this kind of thing, it leads to designer babies and control from the state. Probably there'll be no reproduction in the future, and you'll just go and pick one out of a lab, right? But I still can make a case for CRISPR-9 technology being a good thing in the hands of good people.
All of science can be benevolent if it's being driven by people who have a good soul. Let's put it that way. But unfortunately, because science has its roots in alchemy, has its roots in necromancy, has its roots in communicating with the dead and obtaining forbidden information, that's what's going on. I don't care what area of science you look at. They all have those same points of origin, and none of those points of origin are benevolent in nature.
Absolutely. What is it we call it? The Church of Pseudoscience. It's not academic halls they should be wandering. It's like the cloisters of the Vatican or something these cats should be going around. It really is. But tonight we've covered a lot of topics, and the main thing really to take out of all of this is open your minds to something called ternary. Now, this is, we're thinking replacing qubits and bits, and we're going to be working from threes. And it was Nikola Tesla, he said about the numbers 3, 6, and 9. And, you said today, Tony, if we think about this ternary or this trinary code being the Tesla version compared to the bits being the Einsteinian kind of model, it's a theme we've carried through all of our topics. I think that's a good way for the listeners to really differentiate between the two It's the 3 of Tesla versus the 1s or 0s of Einstein.
Agreed. I think, Einstein was compromised, and he even said the infamous quote was something along the lines of, "How does it feel, Dr. Einstein, to be the smartest guy in the world?" I'm paraphrasing heavily. And he said, "I don't know, but you should ask Tesla."
I love that. I really do love that. And before I forget, folks, don't go anywhere. After the Kev Baker show tonight, I insist that you stay and you hang out with our sister, Lockie. She's going to be joined tonight by Brooks Agnew and Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Now, they're going to be on quantum connections, and they're going to be talking about the glyphosate autism link. Really important information there. Don't go anywhere. And tomorrow night, Johnny, we're obviously going to be joined by Ben Emlyn-Jones. He'll be joining us in the second hour. Looking forward to that.
Oh, every show with Ben, Kev, it's all the things that we talk about, and Big Ben brings it on.
Absolutely. So please join us tomorrow night for the 2-hour show. And Tony, you'll be back on Wednesday. A lot can happen between now and Wednesday. Any plans? Any plans before we have them rudely interrupted and changed along the way?
I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about the upcoming conference on the 16th and 17th and define what full spectrum dominance really means, because we're using The Art of War by Sun Tzu and comparing and using that with biblical scripture. So stay tuned.
It's going to be awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, right? But are we going to be joined by Dane Wigington again on the 18th on the Anthony Pat Show?
I do believe so. Dane Wigington from geoengineering.org. We're going to get some updates on what's going on in the skies above us.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. So Johnny Whistles tomorrow night. We'll be getting into all the good stuff. Rendlesham Forest, disclosure, all that kind of things, man. When Big Ben comes along, he goes to so many of these conferences, or at least the ones he's not banned from, Johnny. What that was all about, who only knows. But he comes across, like we do on here, the very cutting-edge guests with the best of information. And that's why it's just great to bring him in, because like Tony, he fits perfectly here on KBS. And I know that listeners out there, right, he's probably second only to you.
Kev, the thing about Ben is, as you said, he has so much knowledge. Can give him any subject, space, geoengineer, crop circles, you name it. Ben will have a big story on it. And the thing is that I like about him, and Tony as well, is everything that he tells you, that there is always a name attached to go and verify these things. So really great.
Yeah, he's not like me. I reside in the land or the realm of speculation. It's all coming from the quantum effect in my mind. It really is. Now, I hope you're all enjoying this new 2-hour format half as much as I am. Johnny, you're in the chat room. What are they saying about it, dude?
They're loving it, Kev. You know the Blue Crew. Can't beat them, honestly. And they love Tony Patch. There's always questions flying about in the chat. That's what I love about it.
Absolutely. I've been momentarily peeking across to see, and it's always on topic. Absolutely love that. And don't forget, coming up next week, we've got a huge show, because coming to us live from down under, Max Egan is going to be on the Kev Baker Show. Can't wait to hang with Max, find out what he has been up to, because, you know, we were talking about Jim Mars, who unfortunately passed away last week. You know, one of the other leading figures I would definitely point to in this whole movement, and an example to all of us, would most certainly be Mr. Max Egan. He'll be here next Thursday live on the Kev Baker Show. We're also going to be doing an update on our Orbducted. Remember the Orbducted show? More about that tomorrow night. Stay tuned. Lucky coming up after the break. From myself, Anthony and Johnny, wherever you are, make it TFR.
And didn't touch that dial.
God bless you all.
Bada bing, bada. Oh.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Kev Baker. That's right, it's time for the Kev Baker Show right here on TFR Live. Now, I'm coming to you from Glasgow, Scotland, and tonight I'm joined by my good friend, fellow host on the network, author, researcher, speaker, Mr. Anthony Patch. He's here, he's back, and we're going to be getting into more of the science. And tonight we're going to be saying goodbye qubits, hello Trits. Now, more of that as the show progresses, but I hope you've all had a nice weekend out there. I've had a nice, quiet, lazy one. Got new fridge freezer delivered on Saturday, so installed that. And then since then, just been chilling out, recovering after 5 hours of amazing radio on Friday with my good friend here, Tony Patch, and of course, the Woo crew. Now, before we get into all of the good stuff tonight, don't forget your main man, Mr. Johnny Whistles. He will be joining us within probably the next 45 minutes to an hour. So never fear, Whistles is almost here. And of course, one guy who is here tonight is Anthony Patch. And Tony, how are you doing, my friend? Because we had another amazing show on Friday. We finally got connected to David Heavener. Might only have been one segment we done with David, but what a powerful segment of radio that is. And how you doing, man?
Yeah, very good. Friday, we really packed a lot in there. We got real technical and real deep, and then we moved away from the computer language and discussion into a very somber discussion about pedophilia and child abuse and sex trade. And I'm going to be continuing that discussion on Friday as well. Probably not the whole show, but we will touch on it every Friday from now until our conference coming up on September 16th and 17th. It'll be a live stream conference. We'll be talking about the subject of pedophilia and, of course, technology and, of course, biblical scripture. But otherwise, we got some deep stuff for people today. I hope they've got their technical hats on and are ready to be thinking, because already our heads are hurting, aren't they, Kev?
Absolutely. And you know, I'm a science geek. I love all this stuff. But you sent me something today, and I was totally puzzled.
3 steps with a cube to correct an error or arrive at a solution, whereas with a tetrahedron, there's only 2 steps. So that's the short version of it. I'm still working on writing out the program, if you will, utilizing a tetrahedron for error correction rather than a cube. And that's where we're at right now with the research. And we'll bring on more probably Wednesday. When I get done writing this up, I think I will have definitively proved that the proper way to write your error correction code is to use a tetrahedron. And therefore, my conjecture is that's what theyve is already doing. And there's a couple of more things to add to that. But go ahead, Kev.
You know, Anthony Patch has been proven time and time and time again to be correct. You know, he makes these claims months, sometimes years in advance, and then some obscure paper. I already see it, Anthony, how the future is going to affect the past here and actually confirm everything that you're saying, because your track record is absolutely flawless so far. We're still waiting for the demonic hordes to come through the massive portal at CERN, admittedly. But then when we put that information out, we always said that was conjecture too. But nobody can actually argue against the black magic that is going on at CERN. And you'll go going back to this actual video, right, that we watched, and it was the perfect example of how one of these scientists, he's been absolutely blinded by the Church of Pseudoscience, because he's talking about cubes, and like Anthony says, he actually is demonstrating error correction with a cube. You've got values on all the corners of the cube. And then he starts talking about the hypercube, didn't he, Anthony? And this is where you pointed this out. I mean, it was staring him in the face. I had to go back and watch it again, so I got a good laugh at it. But this diagram of the hypercube was made up of absolutely nothing but triangles and tetrahedrons, and he still couldn't see it.
Yeah, exactly. When they ran out the permutations of the steps, geometric steps, and also the numeric steps, there's a 313 at the beginning. It goes to 7, 4, and 3, and then it jumps up to 15, 11, and 3 in terms of the progression. As you run those numbers through the computer at the step-centric rings dimensions rather than parallel. But the model that theyve talks about when they say parallel dimensions comprises a cube. So picture a cube with straight lines. Those lines are in parallel. Those prescribe parallel dimensions. That is the model that they use for writing code to correct errors. And there's a 3-to-1 ratio. If you have a bit and you want to determine whether it's the answer, it's accurate, or whether it's an error, it actually takes 3 additional bits to arrive at a decision. The decision meaning, is this the correct answer or is it an error that needs to be corrected? So there's a 1 to 3 relationship, 1 bit to 3 bits. In the process of writing that error correction software, they describe that geometrically. Okay, the math, again, prescribes geometry. This all goes back to talking about obtaining information through necromancy, getting a mathematical grouping of information that results in geometric shapes. We're giving you just the cube. That's their model for error correction, is the cube. However, I believe the actual model that they're using is not the cube, because as this software engineer that Kev and I watched on this presentation, he said that using the cube model for programming, for correcting of errors, only arrives at half of the perfect correction, that they're only halfway there. At the conclusion of watching his presentation, I said to myself and to him, you should be using a tetrahedron, not a cube. Again, the tetrahedron is the simplest polytope that can enclose a volume, the simplest shape that can enclose a volume. It is not a cube. A cube is composed of tetrahedrons. Therefore, you need to, in the most efficient manner of arriving at a solution, don't use a more complex geometric shape, therefore more steps to arriving at a solution. Go to a simpler geometric shape that requires fewer steps. What I'm outlining to you very quickly here is that they do...
Because you were talking about something called ternary. Now, this is Ternary. And like I say, I was sitting there scratching my head thinking, it's not very often I'm stumped here, but I was stumped, Anthony. Talk to us about what you've been looking into, and more specifically, like I was saying, goodbye qubits, hello Trits. You like that?
I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I'm composing an article for our magazine, You and Me, because you're a major contributor to our magazine entitled Entangled. And the article I'm composing for the September issue is Binary Qubit to Ternary Trit, theyve's hidden code. Yes, we're going to talk about my buddies at theyve again today. And believe it or not, in the second hour, we're going to tie ternary trits to the Mandela effect. Can't let that one go, can we?
Absolutely. And some people in the chat room, they're shouting out trinary. Phyllis is shouting 3 ? And this is where we're going tonight, because often we talk about bits, ones and zeros. And then we were talking about the qubits. Remember those quantum bits that can be ones and zeros at the same time? They can go into superposition. Well, now let's talk about something completely new. And to start with, it's so alien. If anyone's like me out there, it's going to be quite confusing. But there is a lot of stuff on the internet where you can look at this, and it's ternary. This is where we're working from a base of 3, Anthony. It's not just ones and zeros anymore, is it?
No, now we are talking about 0, 1, and 2 as a base 3 system. But in terms of a balanced ternary, because there are a couple of different variations to ternary, but ternary, again, is spelled Ternary. Okay? So ternary system is comprised of 3 digits. It's a -1, a 0, and a +1. That's a balanced ternary system. And the reason that we're talking about this is it has everything to do, here we go again, can't get away from theyve, can't get away from tetrahedrons. So here comes, Mr. Patch talking about tetrahedrons again, but it all factors into a balanced ternary form of computer coding, computer programming. So it is going to get a little deep here today, folks, but we'll try to keep it, up on the surface, and I'll try to translate it for you. But what I'm saying here is that, in short, because I like to give you the punchline at the beginning of the show, I will label it as conjecture at this point, because this is early in my research. Conjecture. I believe that theyve has moved away from binary programming to this 3-numbered ternary programming system, moving away from qubits, which are quantum bits, 0 and 1 binary, to the trinary digit called the trit, T-R-I-T. I believe, because of looking at things that we'll add to and define and give you the evidence later, I believe that the actual process of combinatorial programming, and therefore recursive neural network, Boltzmann machine, deep machine learning for AI, is not based on binary. It is based on a trinary form of computer programming, including decoherence, error correction coding. So that's where we're headed, folks.
You see, this is why it makes a lot more sense, Anthony, right? And for the listeners out there, we often talk about how the elites use the cube, and it should really be the tetrahedron that they're working from. And when you said to me about this trinary, this 3-digit, this working from a base of 3, automatically my head's thinking 369 tetrahedrons. And just from a total layman's point of view, it seemed to make a lot more sense. Now, we were also watching a video the other day, and it was to do with error correction, just like what you were talking about there. And this is where this ternary code has a vast advancement on anything else they're using right now, because this is going to be a lot quicker than their current methods in error testing and error checking, Anthony, isn't it?
It is. When we talk about the mathematics that's obtained through necromancy, as applied with theyve's quantum computers that are accessing what they call parallel dimensions, I call them concentric dimensions. In other words, concentric circles,